On the morning the bus broke down, Mira learned how thin the line was between being seen and being invisible. The engine coughed, shuddered, and died in the narrow street outside the garment factory where she worked, leaving 40 people standing in the damp winter air, clutching lunch tins and old sweaters. Mira held her bag close to her chest, fingers stiff from the cold and from the habit of guarding what little she had. She was late already. Late meant the supervisor's raised eyebrow, the quiet mark on the attendance sheet, the feeling that her life was being measured by minutes she could never seem to save. The street smelled of diesel and damp earth. Vendors were just setting up, spreading tarps and stacking oranges that caught the early light like small suns. Mira watched the driver argue into his phone, his voice rising, while people around her muttered and sighed. She felt the familiar knot of panic tighten in her stomach. She needed this job. Her mother's medicines were expensive, her younger brother's school fees relentless. Every day felt like a careful balancing act performed without a net. A man in a neat coat stood a few steps away, tapping on his phone, his face calm. He looked like someone who belonged to a different world, one where delays were inconveniences, not threats. Mira tried not to resent him. Resentment was exhausting, and she had learned to conserve energy wherever she could. After 10 minutes, the driver announced that another bus would come soon, a word that stretched like rubber and snapped unpredictably. People began to scatter, looking for rickshaws or rides. Mira hesitated. A rickshaw would cost half her lunch money. She turned away, deciding to wait, when a small voice tugged at her sleeve. "Baji," a little girl said, eyes wide. "Do you know when the bus will come?" Mira looked down. The girl couldn't have been more than 7, her hair in 2 uneven braids, her shoes scuffed thin. She was shivering, holding a plastic folder against her chest. "I don't know," Mira said gently. "Where are you going?" "School," the girl replied. "My teacher says if I'm late again," she didn't finish, but the worry sat heavy in her eyes. Mira crouched to the girl's level, ignoring the ache in her knees. "What's your name?" "Anaya." "I'm Mira," she said. "We'll figure something out, okay?" She glanced around. Most people were focused on their own problems, their own calculations. The man in the neat coat was still nearby, his phone now tucked away. He was watching them. "I can walk you part of the way," Mira said, though she had no idea how she would manage her own journey. Anaya nodded, relief softening her shoulders. They had gone only a few steps when the man approached. "Excuse me," he said, his voice measured. "Are you both going toward the main road?" "Yes," Mira said, wary. "My car is parked there," he said. "I can drop the child at her school if you tell me where it is." Mira's first instinct was to refuse. She had learned caution the hard way. But Anaya's hopeful face and the cold creeping deeper into her bones made her pause. "Where do you work?" she asked him. "Near the university," he replied. "I'm a lecturer." Mira studied him, searching for something she could trust. She saw tiredness in his eyes, not impatience. She nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "But I'm coming too." The car was warm, the seats soft. Anaya pressed her hands against the vent, giggling softly as heat flowed over her fingers. The man introduced himself as Farid. He asked Anaya about her school, her favorite subject. She answered shyly at first, then with growing confidence as he listened without interrupting, laughing at her jokes, asking questions that made her feel interesting. When they reached the school, Anaya hugged Mira tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, then turned and ran through the gate, her plastic folder bouncing against her side. Farid looked at Mira. "Where can I drop you?" Mira gave him the address of the factory, bracing herself for the rest of the day. As they drove, the city unfolded in familiar layers, shops opening, men sweeping sidewalks, women hurrying with bags and babies. Farid asked about her work, and she answered honestly, surprised by how easy it felt. He listened the way he had listened to Anaya, as if her words mattered. At the factory gate, Mira reached for the door handle. "Thank you," she said. "You saved her from trouble today. And you saved me from being late to something more important," Farid replied with a small smile. "Sometimes helping is the only thing that makes sense of a morning." Mira didn't know what to say to that. She nodded and hurried inside, her heart lighter despite the supervisor's glance. She worked with a steadier rhythm that day, her hands moving over fabric with practiced ease, the memory of Anaya's smile warming her more than the heaters ever could. Weeks passed. The bus ran, broke down, ran again. Life returned to its usual pace. Mira didn't think she would see Farid again. People crossed paths and drifted apart, that was how the city worked. Then one evening, as she waited in line at the pharmacy, she saw him. He stood ahead of her, a bag of medicines in his hand, his shoulders slumped. When he turned, recognition flickered across his face. "Mira," he said. "How are you?" "Fine," she replied. "You?" He hesitated. "My father's been ill," he said quietly. "These are for him." Something in his voice, controlled, careful, made Mira see him differently. She remembered her own mother's medicines, the endless calculations. "I hope he recovers," she said. They walked out together. Farid paused, then asked, "Would you like tea? There's a place nearby." Mira thought of the dishes waiting at home, the chores. She thought of the rare chance to sit and be more than a worker or a daughter. "Okay," she said. The tea stall was crowded, the air thick with steam and conversation. They found a small table. Farid spoke about his father, a man who had worked his whole life and now struggled to accept help. Mira spoke about her mother, about learning to read medicine labels before she learned to read stories. They laughed at the similarities, the way love often wore the same worried face. Over time, their meetings became a quiet habit. Sometimes it was tea, sometimes a shared ride when the bus failed. They didn't promise anything grand. They listened. They noticed. When Mira mentioned her brother's school project, Farid brought books. When Farid looked exhausted, Mira sent food from home. Small acts, exchanged without ceremony, began to stitch their lives together. One afternoon, Mira arrived at work to find the factory in chaos. Orders were down. Layoffs were rumored. Fear rippled through the workers like a cold wind. Mira's hands trembled as she worked, each stitch a question mark. At lunch, she called Farid, her voice tight. "I might lose my job," she said. "I'm coming," he replied without hesitation. He arrived with sandwiches and calm. He didn't have answers, but he sat with her, his presence a steady anchor. "Whatever happens," he said, "we'll think of the next step." It wasn't a promise of rescue. It was an offer of partnership, and it steadied her more than any assurance could. The layoffs came. Mira was among them. She walked home that day feeling hollow, the city louder than usual. At home, her mother listened, her eyes clouded with worry, then squeezed Mira's hand. "We will manage," she said, the same words she had said all her life. Farid helped Mira rewrite her resume, practicing interviews late into the night. He connected her with a friend who needed help at a tailoring shop. The pay was less, the hours uncertain, but it was work. Mira took it, grateful and determined. Months later, on a day bright with possibility, Mira stood at Anaya's school gate again. The girl ran toward her, taller now, her braids neater. "Baji," she cried. "I got first place in my class." Mira laughed, hugging her. Farid watched from a few steps back, his father beside him, leaning on a cane but smiling. They had come together, drawn by a simple invitation Anaya had insisted on sending. As they stood there, Mira felt something settle inside her, a quiet understanding. Empathy wasn't a grand gesture or a single heroic act. It was noticing the shiver in a child's shoulders, the strain in a man's voice, the fear behind a worker's steady hands. It was choosing, again and again, to step closer rather than turn away. The city buzzed around them, indifferent and alive. Mira looked at Farid, at Anaya, at her own reflection in the school gate's glass. She saw not a collection of separate struggles, but a web of shared humanity, held together by small, deliberate kindnesses. She took a breath, feeling the weight of her days and the lightness of connection. Somewhere, a bus would break down again. Someone would be late. Someone would need help. And someone else, perhaps remembering a morning like this, would choose to stop and listen.